Welcome to my channel. In this tutorial, I will show you how to import pattern tracings, diagrams, and notes into Clo, and then use the patterning and sewing tools to begin drafting a digital twin. Check out my other videos in this series for more information on how to create digital twins of historical garments, and follow my Patreon in the description for additional support. Let's get started. All right, the first step of this process is importing our patterns into Clo. So I'm going to go ahead and draft a square pattern using the S hotkey or the rectangle tool, and just click anywhere in the 2D window and it'll bring up this little pop-up, and I'm just going to type in, I don't really know how big these patterns are yet, but I can change that later, but I'm guessing maybe about 50 by 50 inches is a good place to start. So go ahead and click OK. And now I'm just going to go to this icon right here in the 2D toolbar, the graphic 2D pattern tool. And once I click it, my a little window will pop up where I can search on my computer where I saved all of those patterns. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the patterns that I traced and then photographed on the grid. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the pattern to add the graphic to this pattern piece, and looks like it will fit. It's 45 by 35. That's the default scale. So I'm going to click OK. And I did spend time on this squaring it out in the previous tutorial. So if you haven't, done that, and you can't guarantee for 100% certain that your pattern is almost a square, then I recommend going back to that tutorial. It'll show you how to do that in Photoshop. So even if you didn't do it while you were taking the picture, there's still a chance you can kind of unskew that. So more on that in a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and import the rest of my patterns. I only had one tracing, so that's done, but I also want to import my diagram. So I'm just going to go ahead and Control C, Control V, Control or Command C, or Control or Command V to copy paste this same 50 by 50 grid a couple more times for the rest of my notes. So I had one tracing, I have one diagram, which I'll put here, oops, and then I have one just set of notes, which I'll put over here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this again, and by going to the Transform Graphic tool and just clicking that graphic and then hitting delete on my keyboard. And then going to that same graphic 2D pattern tool, just clicking that again. I'm going to pull up my tracings. If the diagram was made on grid paper, then it's best to just scan this into the computer. But I made this one in Procreate as a way to kind of demonstrate it a little bit easier in a couple tutorials ago. And something that I have noticed that if you just export this pattern, it doesn't export the grid with it, and that's going to be really important for the next step. So instead, I just screenshotted it on my iPad. This is in Procreate, by the way. And so I noticed several times my students did not include the graph, and then it became an issue later on. So that's just a side note there. We're going to leave that there. And then the last thing I'm going to grab is just my handwritten notes. And these are my actual notes that I wrote out. And they are messy, but they are comprehensive. So I'll just leave those there for now. All right, now that all of my patterns, tracings, and my notes are in Clo, I'm going to go ahead and scale these patterns 1-to-1. And this is why it's so important. I'm going to go ahead and close out these windows. This is why it's so important that they are actually unskewed. So I don't really know how best to explain this, but you really need like a 1-to-1 copy of your pattern in Clo. And I can't say this enough. This next step, scaling your patterns 1-to-1, is the most important step from the tutorial from now on, because you have done all this work to make sure that your pattern tracing is as accurate as you can possibly make it. This one's a square, I know, but like if yours looks any different, it has any curves, you've put a lot of work into it. So take the time to scale it properly so that it is as accurate as possible in Clo, and then you don't have to do a lot of work kind of fixing it afterwards. So to do that, I'm actually going to grab the internal rectangle tool. There's no hotkey for it. It's right here on the 2D toolbar. I have to click and hold and then click internal rectangle, and then click anywhere inside this pattern. And you need to make a square square. So, not a rectangle that's like longer than it is wide, just a square square. So I'm going to make one that's 5 inches by 5 inches. You could make one 10 inches by 10 inches, 25 by 25 inches. It doesn't really matter as long as there's something that corresponds to that measurement on your pattern piece itself. So I'm going to go ahead and start with 5 by 5, and then I'm going to find where, oh wow, did this come in? It's actually pretty close in scale. I'm going to find where 5 squares meets, it matches up to this pattern this way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this way. It's very important that you double check that 5 inches in the picture fits 5 inches in the square. And I just want to give a little side note that the larger the square is, the more accurate your scaling will be. So if I made this, 33 inches, that's going to be a more, it's going to be more accurate scaling than if it's just 5 by 5. So because there's just like less margin for error. By the time you get to 33 inches, you can really tell if you're slightly off by like a tiny bit. For now, I'm just going to work with this 5 by 5. And now that this internal square is here, I'm going to go ahead and grab this transform, it's this tool right here, transform graphic tool. There's no hotkey for that. And I'm going to scale the graphic until the reference squares on the pattern match the internal square. So here's my internal square. It's kind of went to gray when I grabbed this icon, but whatever you've drawn or, record, if you have it, this is, I think I mentioned this in the previous tutorial, it's important not to crop out all of these squares because we need these for references. I have also seen people just draw like a 5 by 5 grid just directly onto their pattern piece, which I think is really smart as well. So that's an option too. So if I grab this and this little, gizmo will appear, and I just have to get the corner of the circle. So hover my mouse over the corner of the circle, imagine that, and then scale down. And then, you'll notice kind of when I do that, a couple of things happen. Like 1, this is no longer lined up, so I have to reline it up. And 2, like that, it didn't really give me the option. It kind of scaled down a ton, even though I was not trying to make it. And now it's scaled down too much. What I recommend in this case is actually undoing that scale. And this is what I recommend. I think this is the fastest way to do it. So undoing, scale, 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 scale. What was that? Scale. What? Okay, there we go. And instead of just kind of like going too small, going too big, until you finally get it, this is how I recommend doing this. Click the corner of the circle, get a little bit smaller, right click, and then type in the amount that you want to scale this smaller. And I'm going to try maybe 95%. And then we'll try that. And now I'm going to kind of line it up and see, okay, how is 95%? I'm sorry this is jumping around a lot. I just got a new mouse and I need to adjust the settings. Okay, 95% made it too small. I can see, even this much error is just too much error for this kind of work. So how about I try maybe 96%? Maybe that'll be better. So instead of like kind of making it a little bit bigger, I'm going to undo, and I'm going to repeat this process until I basically guess what percentage this needs to be. So let's try 96. Okay. And then lining this up. Okay. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, that looks really quite good. And I can even kind of test this now that I have this 5 by 5 square. If I just make this square, let's see, if I right click and make it 30, let's make it 31 inches. Okay, and then after 31, oh, you can see how far it gets off after 31 inches. So let's increase this by 101%. Okay, and see how that fits in there. So I'm spending a lot of time on this. I'm spending a lot of time on this to just really emphasize how important this step of the process is, oh my God, look at that. That's so close. I feel really good about that. I think we can start moving on. So the same exact process applies now to this grid because I counted out all these squares when I made this grid. And even though in real life, this is on graph paper, I decided that 1 square equals 1 inch. So therefore, I should be able to just add an internal rectangle and do the same process on that. So that's what we're going to do. And let's see how long this one will go. We'll do a 5 by 5. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and start scaling. And now it's like, okay, like a lot of squares fit in there, but let's go ahead and scale this up. Okay, we're getting closer. We're getting closer. All right, 1, 2, oh shit. Oh, sorry. I mean, I'll leave that in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's just a little bit too big. So right click, scale down. Let's do 99%. Okay, just a little bit too big. And you know what? I'm just going to keep going. 99 again. Okay, move that into place. We're getting real close. That looks pretty good. All right, I feel pretty good about that. All right, so like I said, a lot of time was spent on this process, but this is the one thing that I noticed caused the most error and grief later on is when this was not done properly. So really take the time to get it done correctly. Now we're ready to move on to the next step, which is tracing the pattern, which is super fun. So yeah, this is a square, so that's really funny. But basically, I'm just gonna go to since it's a square, I can use the the S hotkey and just grab a rectangle and then kind of click and drag and trace that square. And that's my pattern. I'm going to go ahead and change this to translucent surface so I can see my notes through the pattern piece, although it can, you can kind of see that. So while I'm working. But if your pattern isn't a square like mine is, then you would just grab the H hotkey, which is the polygon tool, and you're just going to start clicking in each one of these corners until you have, your pattern piece. And then after the fact, if there's curves, you can use the curve tool or the C hotkey, which is right here in the 2D toolbar. Click and hold edit pattern and you'll find the edit curvature tool. And you can add your curves in and just kind of match everything up. One kind of hot tip I have is if you know what the measurements are, like if you're tracing a piece like this, then you can go ahead and grab your polygon tool, and while you're working, I know it's 11.5 from here to here. I can right click and just type in 11.5. Okay, and then I can go and type in, it's 13.5 there. So I can go ahead and kind of work that way around. And that's a more accurate way to work, and it'll tell you pretty much right away if you were accurate with your tracing or not. So I recommend doing that as much as possible. I also recommend just kind of working back and forth between, your tracings and your diagrams. Look at that. That's like pretty good. You'll notice that, even now there's like some discrepancies here, like, is there scaling issues or what's going on? Probably if I check this, it's probably going to give me some clue to what I did wrong. But just having multiple versions of, you've got your tracings and your diagrams, checking them back and forth. And especially since like your curves and your tracings are probably more accurate, but like your measurements and your diagrams might be more accurate. And then at the end of the day, like the notes, that I have you take where you just measure every seam, like that's going to be so handy for you kind of when you're trying to put everything together. So be working back and forth between all the different ways that you took these patterns while you're trying to trace, because and when you run into like you just don't know what to do because they don't match up, which will happen, and that's okay. That's why this process is so cool, because we actually have Clo to help us visualize, and we can reference back to our photos of like, okay, I know it looked different than this, so I can think that this is the version of the notes that's correct on that sense. That's what's so cool about this process, is that we can make adjustments as we go based on our observations of the actual garment. For this process, honestly, I'm just going to work off of my notes because I know that all of these are square, and so I'm just going to kind of read these notes, and using the S hotkey or the square pattern, rectangle pattern tool, I'm just going to be like, okay, well, this piece is 33 by 26, so 33 by 26. Okay. And then you know, this piece right here, I of course didn't get like the whole measurement. I took little pieces at a time. So maybe let's get this one. I know that this rectangle is going to be 26 inches long by 9 wide. So I'll just go ahead and put that one in, and so on and so forth. And even though most of these garments that you're measuring are not symmetrical for one reason or another, maybe they were made for an asymmetrical person, maybe they just got asymmetrical over time, I recommend working symmetrically as much as possible. So I did just draft this whole rectangle, but I'm actually going to cut it in half and then right click, delete half of it. And then using the edit pattern tool, right click this line and then unfold symmetric editing with sewing. That way, this pattern piece is going to work symmetrically. If I change one side, the other side will change as well. And then for, you know, this side, this is actually the sleeve, by the way. I'm going to go ahead and use Control or Command D to duplicate with symmetric sewing and put that on the other side as well. So I recommend, again, working as symmetric as possible. And with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and draft the rest of these patterns, and I'll do a little speed through of the process. All right, so this is actually only like, here's my two sleeves. There's a collar and a hem, and then the kind of the main body. It's a very interesting garment. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier, you can see in my 3D window, I've created a kind of a mess over here. It's going to be really important, and you should probably do this earlier on, but to select all of these pattern pieces, like that have your graphics on them. You can see them if we go to thick textured surface. Right click in the 3D window and choose deactivate pattern and sewing. I actually have that written down as earlier in the process, but I'll go ahead and put it here. And then go ahead and use Shift Q to hide those patterns in the 3D window. Okay, so those are my, I can kind of put those aside for now. They'll be important just a little bit though. Notice that I didn't pattern out this bow. I'm going to do that later because that's more of a kind of a decorative detail. And I really want to kind of see this pattern come together. So I'm going to put the bow aside for now as like a decorative, like finishing detail. And I'm going to go ahead and what I want to do is I want to find an avatar that is going to fit this garment. And this is going to be kind of trial and error. If you have a sense of the measurement of the garment, like in the bust at least, that's great, but you don't necessarily know how this garment was supposed to fit, like how much wearing ease or styling ease is in this garment. So for what I recommend doing is finding research of a similar garment worn on a woman from this period, not necessarily put up in a museum, but like actually from this period. So I'm going to go ahead and create another graphic and import that now. All right, here she is. I found this from the late 20s, which is very affirming of my kind of dating of this garment. And it really looks a lot like this garment in real life, with this kind of collar and this kind of the way that these sleeves work. Mine are kind of sewn together, but it's just generally the shape. And what this is telling me is that this is an extremely oversized garment. So I should probably start just kind of working with this garment in real life, maybe with a smaller figure, and then if I will have to adjust the height once I see it on her. So with that being said, I'm just going to go to my library. I'm using a little bit of an older version of Clo because it has the plugin that I need for Unreal. But I'm going to go ahead and go to Avatar, Female V2, and let's just grab Grace, and we'll go ahead and put Grace in here. All right, and I'll just use Grace as is until I, kind of sew this together on her and figure out maybe a size that works better. It's a lot different than in real life when we are making clothes fit the body. In this case, it's very backwards. We're making the body fit the clothes. All right, we can go ahead and arrange these these pattern pieces on the avatar. I'm gonna go ahead and go to just monochrome surface so I can see the back and the front. And this is for this garment, because of how it works, you know, I usually go Shift F to show arrangement points, but it's never gonna understand what this garment is. So I'm just gonna do my best to arrange it, and I'm gonna go ahead and fast forward through this process as well. My best advice for you in this is you really have to check your notes and your pictures to remember how all of these pieces were sewn together. Depending on your garment, it could be quite simple or it could be quite complex, but it's, you know, that fun challenge of, did I take enough notes on this process? This is kind of the part where we find out. You may find as you're sewing that you will need to add additional points or notches as necessary. Sometimes it's helpful to deactivate patterns that are in the way until you're ready for them. And when you're ready, slowly deactivate your pieces and you can superimpose them over or side or whatever you need into place. All right, we have the start of this garment. She is held on with tacks and a dream. And now the next step, once you have all these main pieces sewn, is to address all of the other internal details that might appear in your notes. So these could be things like tucks or gathers, other things that are still related to the structural integrity of the garment. We're not quite getting into like all the details yet. So my example on this garment is that there are like shearing right here, and at the center back. And I have that in my notes, that there's 2 rows of shirring, and one of them is about 12.5 inches in, and there's 3 rows, and I think I remember that from my additional notes I have. And that together those 3 rows make an inch. So go ahead and go 12.5 inches in. Maybe I'll offset an internal line. Offset internal line, and then I will then offset internal lines on either side of that, 0.5 inches, both sides. And I'll go ahead and do the same for the this kind of the center back here. So offset internal line, and this side I only have to do 1 because it'll automatically mirror it. Okay, and then I'll just go in my property editor, and I'm going to apply elastic, and I actually did measure 4.5 how much that shirring happens. And in real life this isn't elastic, so I'll show you what I'm going to do to kind of mediate that. So those internal lines are selected. I'm going to choose elastic. Again, you know, whatever, depending on what your garment is, you could be doing something completely different. I'm just going to show you what this is needed on this garment. So the ratio, I'm going to ignore that, and instead I'm going to type in the segment length, since I know what that is, 4.5 inches. And then for strength, I'm going to make that 100 because that's going to make it so that it doesn't want to unelastic, like it is fully elastic ticked. All right. Oh my gosh, look at her. So cute. You know, since this is this kind of evening wrap kind of moment, well, I don't know. Let's go ahead and look, you know, now that we have this, you know, I think she's pretty much done. Let's go ahead and like kind of check. All right, it does feel like maybe Our Lady's a little bit too tall, you know, with her mega high heels. But honestly, other than that, like this is perfectly in a really great spot for this part of the process. In the following steps, we will true the garment, double check our seams and things like that. And we'll continue by adding textures and finishing details and all of that fun stuff. But honestly, she looks really great. I might do a little bit more fussing, but I think that's all there is for this section of the tutorial. And if you are working on your own garments, I would love to, I'd love to see what they are. And I'm happy to help if you run into any issues. I'm here for you. So leave a comment, visit my Patreon, do what you gotta do, and I'll see you next time.